Yo.
What up, though?
I got to talk. I gotta tell what I feel. Gotta talk about my life as I see it.
All right then. It's time for you to bring it to the table.
Turn up your radio wherever you at. We about to bring it.
StreetBeat
with Tony B.
For the next hour, Tony B will give you a chance to tackle local, national, and international issues that affect your community.
StreetBeat. Tony.
Welcome to this week's edition of StreetBeat. Daniel, I don't hear my own vocal in my headset. I still don't hear my own vocal in the headset.
I hear you.
All right, let's see here. Okay. Well, maybe that'll do it right there. Hi, welcome to this week's edition of StreetBeat. It's me, your host, Tony B. And the beat of the city continues to be a combination of the impact of the coronavirus on all things, combined with social unrest that initially stemmed from the George Floyd murder. We are going to be talking tonight about education, the impact of transitional education, the transition to virtual education, what that's going to look like, what has happened, what we anticipate happening, and I guess just simply all things regarding the impact of what's going to happen with those who are going to be in school. We're going to focus on K through 12, but if you're also attending higher education online, this is impacting you as well. My guest is going to be Dr. Ayanna Gore, a Chicago native that joined the Washington community. About 3 years ago, she graduated with her doctorate in educational leadership at DePaul University, where she was titled, Am I a Systemic Inequity Interpreter? Inequity, I think I got that right. Understanding the influence of critical race educating through the narratives of alternative educated Black educators. Dr. Gore, are you there with us?
Yes, I am.
Well, it is awesome to have you on the show, and what I don't have here is your exact title for your work at Sierra Summit. And
I am the executive director, principal there.
Well, this is going to be an issue that we will have an open, honest, and frank conversation about. And again, during these times, Black Americans usually are working the essential jobs to support this U.S. economy during COVID-19 pandemic. And we're talking about, in particular, education and how does that factor into moving forward and the systemic oppression. You know, there are a lot of protests going on right now that's, again, started out as a result of George Floyd and focused on police brutality against African Americans. That's taken a shift. You know, I'm not debating that, and you certainly can, or someone else can as well. A lot of those things have to do with defund the police. But as we found out with COVID-19, when these things impact the country and they're bad, it's worse for Black people. And the inequity of education of Black Americans is going to be no different. I'll talk about a few things right away that impact this, just the disparities in general. And with the existence of COVID-19, you got parents out there who are afraid of losing their jobs. That adds stress. You got family members who are afraid of and worried about, and rightfully so, contracting the virus. That adds stress. You've got folks who have lost family members. This affects stress. It affects mental capacity. It affects, and you correct me if I'm wrong here when I give you the opportunity to join in on this conversation as the expert here, it affects cognitive functioning. Black Americans disproportionately are represented during this COVID-19 and bear the brunt of these stress reactions. And this is eventually, inevitably, again, you correct me if I'm wrong here, going to impact the ability to teach Black children. What do you think?
100% correct. We think about when you think about learning, even think down to like the youngest child or toddler or just even as our own upbringing when we say like, oh, when they touch the fire they'll learn, or those type of um parables and things like that where we say how somebody experienced learning, and a lot of learning is through pain. So now we have entire world, right? We have a global pandemic that's experiencing pain. We have a group of people, Black people, that have experienced pain so much so that now we're hitting to a wall where this pain is building up so much. And we take children that experience learning in such and I'm naming it. It's like learning happens in such painful ways for a lot of Black and brown children, in a very inequitable system. And now the world is experiencing pain. It compounds upon a student's social emotional ability to just even function day to day. And a lot of that has to take into account in the way we do schools. I think that we, as a school leader myself, when we think about planning for the upcoming school year and going and people ask like, well, what is it going to look like virtual? And how do you ensure you're going to do work? And then there's a conversation like, how do you make sure like the teachers are doing what they need to do and work there? And when honestly, when we should have been doing it already, which is innovating in education, we are forced to, because if you do not, it will not work. And we saw that in the spring, honestly. A lot of schools had a hard time. And I not only am I speaking as an educator, I'm speaking as a parent, as a family member who has children in school systems here, that it was not working for them. And because we tried to take old inequitable systems and try to put it on a virtual and slap it into a virtual platform, and we can't do that. There is a lot that we need to invest into some social emotional support for our students, for our children, and there's a lot of critical consciousness work that has to be done and developed into curriculum. We have no choice. Whether or not you're doing it, they're seeing it every day on the news, on TV, and we have to respond in a more innovative way, and critically develops our students to not only be abolitionists in their learning and in this world, but it's supporting them socially, emotionally, and helping them to deal with this pain.
Again, my guest is Dr. Ayanna Gore. Let's share a little bit of information as we continue this conversation about the impact of learning during COVID-19, the transition to virtual learning, and the impact that this is going to have as we move into the new year for the students who are going to be learning, and in particular, the impact that this is going to have on Black students. As I said before, when COVID first happened, everybody was saying we're all in this boat together. Well, you know what? Black people were not in that same boat. Our boat was leaking way faster. And as we approach this new school year, we're talking about open schools, reopen schools, what that's going to look like, virtual education. Again, my guest is Dr. Ayanna Gore. Let's talk about Sierra Summit and just share some information about Sierra Summit.
We are being very intentional about the transition into a virtual setting. We're literally doing virtual school. It's not distance learning.
I'm sorry, Ayanna. Let's give some back up a little bit. You're a charter school. Tell people who you are.
Just tell you something. Okay. I'm so sorry. I jumped right into it. Summit Sierra is a high school. It's a 9 through 12 charter public school. And it's going into our 6th year this year. We have had 2 graduating classes. We're an intentional small school. So our motto is built to have 400 students at most, 100 per grade level. And one of the reasons why is because we have a very structured mentor model. Every student has a mentor, every student is seen and heard. Every student has a connection with at least one adult in the building that they can that checks in on them on a weekly, consistent basis. And so that's a big piece of our model, and that model uh, brings in the focus of skill building, which we call cognitive skills, our habits that we want students to have to be successful in post secondary education once they graduate, um, their next steps, and them having like social emotional development throughout their 4 years to understand like what are my next steps once I graduate, and really honing in on, of course, like the content knowledge that any school is supposed to deliver to their students. And yeah,
Go
go
ahead.
ahead.
And so I just wanted to make sure, give some background information on Summit Sierra, and we'll do more of that again as we talk about what's going on here. So your focus, again, in your educational background, is to provide support to educators with the cultural competency lens. What does that
Yeah,
mean?
that is so my work, which is to be like systemic interrupters, and my work is around supporting and leading a way that teachers are very self-aware, are very knowledgeable about the systemic historical systems that are playing education, and how do they incorporate that in school for critical consciousness on a daily basis within their work. There's actually a book by Scott Snyder and Darren Graves called that Schooling for Critical Consciousness, which is amazing work that studies 5 different schools led by school leaders of color. That whole purpose is around having curriculum that enlightens students, and builds them to be abolitionists in this work. And my goal and my work is to support teachers and develop teachers to be able to do that and lead in that way.
All right.
Um, One of my teachers told me today, she sent me a text message and said that she was at a conference that was about, critical building culturally relevant curriculum. And she said that somebody said in a call, you can do all of this stuff as a teacher, but you need to be at a school where your school leader makes it uncomfortable to be racist or have racist practices in your classroom. And she sent me a message saying, I think, oh, as soon as she said that, I knew. I was like, I have that. Like people are uncomfortable and need to be uncomfortable. And so that's what that means in my work, where it is to lead um, teachers that are critically conscious.
My guest again is Dr. Ayanna Gore. And we're having a conversation about public education, the impact of all of these things happening at the same time. Again, you've been to, or you've seen, or you've watched, or you've heard of protests that are taking place for a number of different reasons. Originally, this all stemmed from 8 minutes and 40 seconds of watching George Floyd have his life taken from him. The world watched, and at that particular time, the world watched African American people stand up for police brutality. And then other folks began to join that allyship, and in some instances co-opted, and it is what it is. Now there are a number of reasons why people are protesting. Now there's this thing called performative protesting, or all these other $10 words that go along with it. But the crisis still remains, and as we approach this upcoming school year, everyone is concerned what that education is going to look like and what that is going to be. And I'd like to get your feedback on this, Dr. Gore. There are studies that show that African Americans are more comfortable, at least looking forward to. I don't know if looking forward to is the right word, but African Americans are more okay with online learning. I'd like to get your feedback about why you think that is. And you know what? I haven't taken a phone call yet, but I'm a.
Okay.
Are you calling to be on Street Beat? Okay. Do I have the caller on the line? Okay. I didn't even mention taking phone calls yet, but that was a call
Okay.
early on. But we'll take some phone calls a little bit later. So I'll give away that number 206-290-9685. If you want to join this conversation, that number again is 206-290-9685, 290-U5, YOU5. Why do you think, and maybe this is just one study and may it's different, that black families are a little more comfortable with being in school online?
I think there could be a number of things, right? I mean, one, let's just take the obvious like health things. In the black community, there's a lot of distrust when it comes to like the health system. I mean, we going back to like Tuskegee, there's a lot of things, and there are families that are like, okay, this is real. We're seeing people in the black community die. We are at great numbers across this nation. We don't want our children in spaces where we think they're going to catch it. That's one. If we just look purely at like the health aspect of that. And also, I think it also allows for a level of flexibility in families or in students' lives.
I
Yes, go ahead.
answered the phone. Is this
Oh,
caller calling to be on the show on Street Beat?
Hello, yeah, I'm just calling to like, hello?
Yeah. Are you calling?
uh-oh.
Are you there? Okay, I'm gonna try and cut this. Ayanna, we just got this phone, and I'm still working it out.
Okay.
I'm
No,
sorry.
it's
Go
fine.
ahead.
But I was just saying that it does offer a level of flexibility for students that I've seen, like you named it, right? You said that there are families, especially in the black community, and brown community, where parents are either like have lost jobs or they're still in jobs where they have to go out. And so now with schools being closed and being able to like to be home, support around the home, or I've literally had students that have to take on jobs to help their families. I've heard about students and families reach out to me about needing to, whether that's like care for their own siblings, go out of the house and take jobs, people working at these like fast food restaurants or warehouses and things like that. And that it does provide that level of flexibility. Not saying that that's what we want for, every student, but I could imagine that, yeah, that study that found that it was high amongst black families. I can see that.
and
Definitely.
and part of the reason was the black student not having to be at a school where they face microaggressions, not having to be at a school again where there was systemic racism in place, not having to be in a school where they have to code switch and become this other person, and so not going to school and learning from the comfort of home created another potential to not have to deal with some of those systemic things that we're talking about.
Agreed. And I will say though, I would say all of that to note that just because we went virtual doesn't mean those things don't show up.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there is a lot of thought of like, okay, I'm in my own space, right? When you're in a world where not everybody looks like you, or systems isn't structured to fit you, it feels uncomfortable. You're on a show, you're performing, we're coding, there's so much things that we have to think about on a daily. And whereas when you're in your space and you're in your comforts of your home, you're absolutely right. I am able to be authentically me and focus on me, and then engage in the learning in a manner that I would like to.
My guest again is Dr. Ayanna Gore. We are talking about education during COVID-19, during this, I don't know what you want to call it, awareness of historical disparities that impact black and brown people. That, of course, as we move into this new school year, as we look at what's going to happen with this transition to online education, as I mentioned before, there's a study that say for some reasons that we just discussed, black families are more open to the concept of online education, but the reality it does not meet that. Only 60%, again, just using some of the statistics here, of black households had broadband service in 2019. Only 45% of black Americans owned a desktop or a laptop, and so without the access to internet or a computer, parents are at a disadvantage. And I think that you can explain this a lot better than I can, that over the summer, if kids aren't continuing to be academically challenged, they're going to lose some stuff anyway. Now you add on to that almost the entire spring. You've got kids who are going to come in and could conceivably have lost a whole year of education. And, my thought is this is going to impact black students in regards to the potential for special education requirements. I don't know. Now I'm moving into your area. This is the other side of that, the negative consequences of transitioning to virtual and online learning, Dr. Gore. And I'd like to
Yeah.
have you jump in on this.
Yeah, it's sad, and I also just feel in a very um I'm torn, like in the position that I'm in, because I mean, being 100% honest with you, my students at Summit Sierra High School were afforded an opportunity in virtual school that other schools were not getting. To be totally transparent, like my own niece school had not started any type of online classes until a month after my students had begun. My students went into virtual learning right when the governor announced the like shelter in place. Whereas I know school districts that's waited and started after spring break, was like a 4-week difference. So I'm kind of torn where like I am experiencing as a black woman leader, I'm experiencing and seeing people in my own family and in my own community being hurt by this. Whereas a school leader that was able to support and provide a structured learning space, a social emotional space for my students in a way that honestly no other school was doing at the time. That what's going to happen is, and the concern is, if there is not a plan, if schools don't have a very clear plan to ensure that every student is seen and heard in a virtual space, if they don't have a very clear plan of how the learning will be personalized for kids, even in a virtual space, I am extremely concerned about what this will do, especially to the Black community. There is already so many levels of gaps that exist right now in education between Black students and between white students. Just plain, so much research out there that shows the educational gaps that occur as early, honestly, as early as kindergarten. But we see it exacerbated as they enter into third grade. And going through a spring that didn't have last spring we were like in stress management mode, right? Every school district was like, oh my goodness, what do we do? It's shelter in place. Let's get something going. Schools are creating packets. Like people were just in panic mode. Whereas now it should be like, here's a plan and this is what learning will look like. And unfortunately, we're not seeing that from every school. I can't share what it looks like at my own campus, but I have yet to hear anything beyond that continues a disjointed experience. The like going on computers, and then some days in, some days out, learning here in person, whether online, it feels very disjointed. And for students that could be years behind grade level, we will see the gap widen. I believe we will see the gap widen.
Is there an awareness among the education community about these concerns that we are discussing right now and these real life impacts that this could have on, in particular, black children who we know, even though there may not be the aggregated information to show us that, we know that this is going to impact them negatively and more so than other students and black and brown students.
Yeah, I would say I feel like nobody can deny it, right? It is almost like what's going on. It is a mirror around what's going on in the world right now. Where like we know there were, many people that the Black Lives Matter movement started way before the incident that occurred with George Floyd, but it was like a catalyst that like, okay, this is it. And nobody can deny it. Even if you don't, even if you don't believe in that, or you are like so oblivious to what is going on in the Black community, everybody sees it. Well, in the education world, the same thing is happening. Everybody sees it. And that's why you see and you hear creative grading scales come out, because like, oh, we want to make sure we're not failing everybody, or things are happening, or that's when you start to see, creative school like structures, like, because we need to make sure students with like specialized needs, etc., like they're in and we're in place. But it's being, so everybody is acknowledging that. I have not heard even the school that has the smallest percentage of Black students still acknowledging that something is happening. But the thing is the acknowledgement of it versus of like thinking like, okay, what do we need to do and be innovative and not try to fit a 19th century style of teaching into a virtual way. That's not being addressed. It is still, this is why I said like, yeah, there are some families that are like, I like that I can have virtual, and maybe is I can avoid level of microaggressions, etc. But the systems can still exist in a virtual space if we do not create a structure, an education, a system that allows for students to have personalization and an equitable chance to learn.
Dr. Gore, we're going to get back to this in a second. What is your principal and CEO of Summit Sierra?
Yeah, principal and executive director.
Principal and executive director of Summit Sierra Charter School. And we're going to be back to talk more about facing what's coming up here in the fall with this transition to virtual learning, the impact that it's already had, the impact that it could have, and if anything is being done about it. We'll be back to talk more about this with Dr. Gore right after this.
This is Paul Pearson, host of Star Time. And when I'm not stopping a Mercer Island street brawl, I'm listening to RainierAvenueRadio.world.
This is your Rainier Avenue Radio.world community update on online Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. If you're looking for an AA meeting, find one every day online at aaphonemeetings.org. That's aaphonemeetings.org.
This is the news on Rainier Avenue Radio. The Washington State Auditor's Office has begun investigating security weaknesses in the Employment Security Department as claims pile up amid the pandemic. Up to $650 million is known to have been stolen by national and international criminals taking advantage of the situation, which was exacerbated when the state loosened security in order to speed up processing. Per King 5, the Auditor's Office admitted that their investigation will only add to the massive backlog already experienced by the Employment Security Department, quote, whose employees are already overwhelmed trying to process claims in addition to answering questions from auditors and agents, unquote. Results from the investigations will begin coming in by November, with the last of them expected to be released in March or April.
And that's your news on Rainier Avenue Radio.
Sunday nights from 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. It's K-Fox Night Beat with DJ Nastiness.
Bringing back the memories.
Bringing back the memories.
Bringing Seattle's hottest music.
Bringing Seattle's hottest music.
Rainier Avenue Radio.world.
Big Day of Play is happening again this year, Saturday, August 15th, noon to 3 p.m. Big Day of Play is a celebration of Seattle's diversity and encourages neighbors, communities, and families to have fun, build relationships, and be active together. This year it's going to be a little different. Big Day of Play is going to be virtual. You can pick up your free Big Day of Play kit at Rainier Avenue Radio on Tuesdays between 10 a.m. and 5 p.m. and on Fridays between 1 to 3 p.m. The free Big Day of Play kits include volleyball, basketballs, kickball, jump ropes, sidewalk chalk, frisbees, pedometers, water bottles, and more. Pick up your free Big Day of Play kit from Rainier Avenue Radio, 810 23rd Avenue. Other pickup locations include the Rainier Beach Community Center and the New Holly Campus parking lot. Free Big Day of Play kits available now. For more information, visit RainierAvenueRadio.world.
You're listening to RainierAvenueRadio.world. Check us out on social media. Facebook and Instagram, RainierAvenueRadio.world, and on Twitter at RainierAvRadio.
You're listening to Street Beat. It's me, your host, Tony B. My guest is Dr. Ayanna Gore, Executive Director and Principal at Summit Sierra High School Charter School in Seattle. We are talking about education and the transition from which is going to have to happen, from being physically at school to online, and what that's going to look like, in particular for Black students, brown students, and what that's meant so far and the long-term ramifications of this. And as we approach the school year, what's going to be done? We know that the white-black achievement gap is as high as about a year and a half difference in some states, meaning that in the ninth grade, the students who are white are about a year and a half ahead educationally. So you can be mad at me for saying that if you want to. It just is what it is, and you can debate that if you want to. But we do know that achievement gaps are directly related to and stem from the structural and systemic racism that Dr. Gore and I have been talking about. And with schools moving to an online format, a spring has been lost, a summer has been lost, and there will be continued difficulty transitioning to this format for some families. As we mentioned, some families don't have internet access, and some families have neither internet access nor a desktop or a laptop at home. But these Black parents will continue to work essential jobs, and the inequities that come with this create stress. And this stress impacts cognitive functioning and the mental capacity to learn. You add that on with going into a school system where, again, some of the microaggressions that weren't being faced and some of the systemic oppressions that weren't being faced are going to continue to rear its ugly head, but in an online way. And you have the potential for a disastrous learning experience, and maybe I'm overstating this, but I'm just looking at what we've got going here for Black students if something is not done. And Dr. Gore, it doesn't sound to me like this is getting the type of attention that it needs from the school system. And are the teachers getting, as you mentioned, that's part of what you do. Are the teachers also becoming informed about what may exacerbate the achievement gap because of what's happened? And then on top of it, are the parents being informed so that everyone is prepared to deal with this?
Yeah, we had, I was able to be a part of some conversations with my own teaching staff where we talked a lot about the impact of this. I mean, we can see it even within the structures of like this, like what folks call like online learning. So, you know, what this has looked like in some schools, I have seen where it's a teacher shares some information and some work, and they connect with the students for about 30 minutes and then tell them to go on work, right? Well, when students are coming in on like the different grade level or needed more support or are different types of learners, like myself as a Black woman, I'm a very kinesthetic learner. I need to get up and move. I need to see something. I'm not a just auditory learner. And when we take about a group of people, Black people are a collectivist culture. We like to connect. We like to collaborate, and we get a lot of strength and power from our group. And to take that away and from the learning, take that away from the learning and do this it's almost like a pull yourself up by your own bootstraps type of learning, to say like, hey, you log in, you make sure you wake up on time and you log in, and I'm going to share some information and then go on about your day and work. That, and then when you think about that, is in some certain families that are more privileged and have the opportunity to like, okay, well, I could do that for a bit, and I'm going to hire a tutor to like meet with my child afterwards and coach my child afterwards, and we have these programs and et cetera. And like you're saying, even the resources alone, if we're talking about computers and internet and whatnot, but even the structure of it, that it is a very individualistic way of learning. And it's not what our culture even comes from. And so in these conversations, that I think when we first went into virtual learning, and I had teachers, white teachers, say to me like, this is problematic. Like, you can't do learning in that way. You can't just do here's the information and go about your business and hope that the students get the work done on their own. You can't expect that from everyone. You can't expect that from students that are coming in fundamentally behind and need support. And it has to be a way that we are able to continue some type of community, some type of small group support, and differentiate instruction even in a virtual world. So that means creating, whether it's visual, whether it's auditory, whether it is breaking down problem and peer. One thing at my school at Summit Sierra, we had a group of peer leaders that stepped up and supported their fellow friends and created like tutoring hubs. We are like online tutoring groups breaking out everywhere. Students are supporting each other in physics, supporting each other in chemistry. And it's not just a come in, check in, and we wish you the best of luck. And if you didn't finish it, then you can finish it up next year. That's what some students, our students were told. That's what students at some schools were told. Like, okay, if you don't finish it now, we understand it's a pandemic. You just have an incomplete and you could finish it later. What? So now we're years behind. And what opportunities are we now closing for students? What doors are now going to be harder to walk through because of this? And don't get it. I know people are saying that like, oh, everybody understands it's a global pandemic. Universities understand it's a global pandemic. Even colleges have come out to say, we're not taking the SAT, et cetera. But at the end of the day, we know universities are savvy. Colleges are savvy, programs are savvy. They already calculate their own GPAs. They already think about, where you're going to major. This is not going to be just a walk in the park. If we do not see support, intentional support that allows us to scale build in students that are falling behind, if we're not able to support our Black students, we are going to see that gap widen, and we are going to see opportunities close.
You're listening to Street Beat. It's me, your host, Tony B. My guest is Dr. Ayanna Gore, Executive Director and Principal at Summit Sierra High School. We're having a conversation about the impact of the coronavirus and the social unrest and all these things taking place and what it's going to do to education. And again, going back to the original reason why these protests were taking place, as African Americans decided, despite a coronavirus pandemic, to march in support of creating awareness to police brutality, and white allies began to join this, and then pretty soon it began to take on a different form. And as folks are out there protesting, primarily defund the police and what that means and what that will look like, and again, having this original message be co-opted, there are things that are imminent. One of those is education. And there is new research that suggests by this September, most students will have fallen behind where they would have been had they stayed in the classrooms. Now, yes, that kind of makes sense, with some of them losing the equivalent of a full school year's worth of academic gains. What's your guess that that's going to be primarily black students? Racial and social economic achievement gaps will most likely widen because of the disparities in access to computers, home internet, the stress that we were talking about earlier, and direct, as you were mentioning before, direct instruction from teachers. This crisis is not even beginning yet. The harm that could come to students could grow if this continues, if teachers aren't aware. And so, again, I'm kind of, I don't know if I'm, putting a negative picture out there, but at this point, with not a lot, we can expect high school dropout rates to increase. We've got younger kids who could be missing out on foundational concepts for phonics and fractions that could impair them for the lifetime, or not prepare them for a lifetime of learning and working. Dr. Gore, what do we do with this? How do we support teachers as they're approaching this, having never done this before and having to teach online in completely different circumstances? What do we say to parents about this? We know what it is, but when does it start turning into understanding why it is and what we're going to do about it?
We have to strip away all of the things that we normally would have honed in on, right? When we get into this space, and not saying that it's completely gone, but there is less incidences of behavior management, or less incidences of all of the teachers aren't just focusing on the glitz and glam of the classroom. There's a little bit of that. I used to love it. I used to love starting the year out and decorating my room and doing all these things. But these things are stripped away, and we really hone in on instruction. How do we best support our teachers? This is our opportunity to get innovative and really think out of the box of what instruction looks like. How do you take away the professor that professes and replace it with someone that is facilitating learning? We go into that problem-based learning and really take curriculum and flesh it out. What are the questions that we are asking? How can we pose problems for students, for them to grapple with virtually, for them to turn off the computers and then grapple with it in their homes, and build these skills and really hone in on what are the skills our students need to be successful in this world once they are graduate, to live right now, not even graduate, right now, to be activists right now in their day-to-day, to go out into the community and respond as we're seeing to the societal concerns that are going on. How can we take this and learn from this and put it inside of our learning today? When students log onto the computers, what conversations are they having right now with their teachers? What is the learning going to look like? And then how can we take that same information and really dig into it? For me, the way we support teachers is we support them in the way we want them to lead and support our students. So for me, that's me getting on preparing for my teachers and professional development and having the articles ready. Like, let's look at this court case that the students of Detroit had when they sued the school district for the lack of literacy they had when they graduate. Let's understand, with those Black people that sued an entire school district in Detroit because they said they were not afforded the opportunity, their right to learn, to read. And so what are we doing now? Let's dig into that. What's the problems? What's some things we could have done? Let's problem base around this and let's learn. Now let's take this and put it into our classrooms. What does that look like virtually? Who do you check? How are you checking in? How do you structure your class that every student is engaging and they're heard and you hear from them? You now have an opportunity where there are 20 students that logs into my online platform, whatever you use. I have now the opportunity. Let me launch something. Let me set you up. You guys break out in groups. Let's use this system. Let's break out into some Zoom rooms, whatever you're using. Let's connect. Let me focus in on a particular skill. Let's pull out evidence, and we're going to use this evidence. Let's look at the evidence in the Breonna Taylor's case. Because if one of the skills that anybody needs to know how to do is how to take factual evidence and apply it and create an argument. But let's take what's going on in this world, and let's do that now and make it real. Life is real right now for our kids. And if we're logging in and trying to do this, like, memorizing remote facts and plugging along and chugging along, this is not going to help. Especially Black students are going to fall behind because they are not being their identity. It would not show up in the structure. This is not the way we learn. It is not showing up in the structure and how we learn. Going back to what I shared earlier about being a collectivist culture. And we approach that, school leaders approach that, developing their teachers and reminding them that, like, no, things aren't normal. This isn't normal, and we shouldn't learn in that way and try to fit it in the normal way, traditional way, into the virtual sense. And we should be challenging our teams, each other, challenging other leaders, challenging teachers, just around what topics, what does it look like, and using what's going on in the world today to be the platform for learning.
You're listening to Street Beat. It's me, your host, Tony B. My guest is Dr. Ayanna Gore, Executive Director and Principal at Summit Sierra Charter High School in Seattle. We're having a conversation about education during a pandemic and historical social unrest that has been exacerbated by the pandemic, and awareness created by the 8 minute and 46 seconds that everyone got to watch of George Floyd's murder, which the world recognized as inhumane and injustice police brutality against Black Americans, that led to protests, which eventually led to allyships, which eventually is leading to folks looking at other things that they have as causes. It just is what it is. You know how we get down on Street Beat. We have open, honest, frank conversation. When this thing started, if a lot of Black students, a lot of students of color were just out of school. The concern was, are we going to feed them initially, not even teach them? Please believe that there were white students and generally affluent who were transitioning way faster, and that means that gap was getting bigger. And now we are coming up on the new school year, and Black communities, communities of color, Black and brown communities should be concerned. And again, Dr. Gore, you correct me if I'm wrong here, about the negative consequences of this period of stay-at-home orders related to COVID-19 that it's having on on their children's educational attainment. So, going into the school year, you said you were doing some creative things at Summit. Can you share some of those things? And then I want to give you an opportunity for final words here. We've talked about some things, and I'm seeing, a potential for bleakness, and it doesn't even seem as though there is any real energy for saying, we need to fix this before the school year starts.
Yeah. It we are and that's our focus is like what is the fix? Even as much as I think I would say last spring for us at Summit Sierra was fairly successful. I think if you look at it, and I'm being very critical about it when we look at what's going on in our world today, we were very successful. But there is so much to know and to do, and we're already thinking about going into the next school year. Like we have to move from that stress management of like, oh my goodness, a pandemic is happening, to like we have a new normal, and we gotta also still ensure that we have a equitable learning experience for all kids. One of the things that we are focusing in on is that social emotional piece. We are devoting time around what I call DEI activators, which which I am going to be engaging with my own team with, and they in
Can you
turn,
tell us what that DEI is? All of us don't know the acronym. Does that stand for
equity and
something?
inclusion.
Say it again. DEI?
Yeah, diversity, equity, and
Oh,
inclusion.
okay. Thank you.
And no, it's fine. And I'm so sorry. I might please stop me if I use any. We use a lot of acronyms in the EA world. Period. Education. So let me know. But we are spending time of like. Let me give you an example. I am going to take my students through an entire week around. Let's look at learning and the fact that we all learn differently. Everybody learns differently. Let's look at systemic racism. Let's look at college access versus inclusion. There's a lot of schools that promise will help your kid get to college, but it's a totally different topic when we talk about when you show up as a Black student in if you go to a PWI, a predominantly white institution, and the lack of inclusion there. And then we're talking about privilege. And white privilege, just to name that. And spending time before we even dig into any content, spending time to like, let's talk about these things. Let's talk about how we want to combat that in our experience, in your learning experience virtually. And what does that mean for you? And I'm going to share, and we're going to learn from one another our stories that we have connected to that. We know in many communities, whether it's Native communities, Indigenous people communities, Latin communities, and Black communities, storytelling is an art form where our history is passed through. So in our schools, as we are planning for this upcoming school year, before you're just lying of the DEI, the diversity, equity, and inclusion talk frameworks and talking points, and starting there, so that when we start to get into this work, it's a fabric of every conversation. So then my student, young Black man, we're in this shelter in place a month out from now, we're doing virtual learning. And we've had conversations about systemic racism. We are being very open as a community and as a school, and doing this with my teachers. And you have now an opportunity to not only advocate for your needs, but know that you heard a commitment from your teachers, you heard a commitment from your school leaders around, we cannot have systems, we must interrupt them, that is going to perpetuate that. So if you feel like that's going on, speak up. And our goal is that we have very strong student leadership that we're cultivating within our team. We're not like, oh, we're preparing you to lead in the future. We're preparing you to lead right now. And given everything that has gone on, I mean, and all of this was a goal of mine before everything that happened over this summer and before George Floyd, because we know this was a real need even beforehand. It just created a catalyst for us. And I think this is our year to be catalytic, and we are only going to see that change if students are leading this charge. They are leading the structures. They are speaking out to what's working for them or not working for them in virtual school. They are peer supporting one another, and they have a space. They have a mentor. They are being checked in on every week. They are being they have a connection that we understand. How are you doing? Let's connect what's going on in this world to learning right now, and let's ensure that you are staying focused on the skills, not just completing of worksheets or work or packets, but like we got skills that you can showcase throughout this year, throughout this virtual. Who knows how long this will last, but that these skills are being focused, and that the conversation in the air world. Back to your question around like, what is the conversation here? The conversation is, once this is over, what's going to be different about schools? Because we cannot go back to the way it was.
Dr. Gore, I'm going to have about 30 seconds for you for final words here. Thank you for joining me. And thank you for engaging in this conversation. I might be a little pessimistic. I might be a little cynical. But again, just as when this pandemic started, and there was not an awareness of the fact that this was going to impact Black and brown people more critically, there seems to be an unawareness as all of this stuff is out there being talked about and discussed. Nobody's really talking about the upcoming school year and the impact that that's going to have and the damage that's already been done and could be done. So I appreciate you coming on the air with me and having this discussion. I got about 30 seconds for you to have final words.
I would just say, I know it does look, it looks tough and it looks bleak, but I would say the like glass half full side of this is that we have an opportunity to break a system that was not created for Black kids and create one that is. And just as we have in the medical world, where in medicine, they're innovating new techniques every day. There are literally medical procedures that they no longer do, that might have existed when you and I were children, that they no longer do because they found a better way to do it. But yet in education, that looks exactly the same.
Okay, Doctor.
This is our time to break it up.
Thank you, Dr. Gore, for joining us. We may have to do this again. Appreciate you jumping on. And
thank you.
Again, Dr. Ayanna Gore, Executive Director and Principal of Summit Sierra High School Charter School in Seattle. That's it. That's all the time that I have. That's going to do it for the kid. It's me, Tony B, your host of StreetBeat, saying, remember, whether you believe you can or whether you believe you can't, you are probably right. I'm out. Peace.
Red.